came into Nashville in February of 1862 and stayed. And Nashville was very important to the Union cause, primarily because of the railroads and the rivers. There were two cities that I was very, very concerned about keeping. Washington, D.C. was one, Nashville was the other. Nashville, other than Washington, D.C., Nashville, Tennessee was probably the most fortified city in the United States. It was a very important city. So they built this fort. They named it after one of their officers, Fort Negley. It's the largest masonry fortification in inland United States. Now, quite frankly, they called the Battle of Nashville and they talk about Fort Negley. Well, the Battle of Nashville took place mostly south of here. The fort actually never came under fire. I think maybe they fired a few ceremonial shots, but that was about it. But the significance is the big guns were pointed south. The little guns were all pointed toward the city to remind the citizens of Nashville that they were an occupied city, and as long as they behaved themselves, it would be all right. But Nashville was very crucial. And it ended here. For all intent and purposes, in 1864, the Battle of Nashville between General George Thomas and John Bell Hood, the war, for all intent and purposes, was pretty much over after that. It lasted very little after that. But Nashville was so crucial because of the transportation more than anything else. And we hope that now that people will come back and see this, and the significance of it today is very important, because this fort was built by conscripted labor, free and enslaved black men, women, and children, probably 2,300 of them. A lot of them against their will. Very few were paid for their labor, and somewhere around 800 died of exposure on the ground that we're standing on now. So the future of this site, we hope, is going to be a memorial to those free and enslaved black people that not only built this fort, but defended this city. I hope that answers your question.
This is a very significant site because the Confederates actually wanted to get this back. It was occupied in 1862, and my great-great-granduncle came down here and was part of the 18th Michigan Volunteer Infantry, and they were stationed here. And it was a very strategic point for supplies and everything from the north, which you may have heard from somebody else up here already. But the Confederates were trying to get it back, and had they been able to cut off General Schofield down in Spring Hill and down in Columbia, instead of John Bell Hood letting them sneak past him in Spring Hill while he was sound asleep at night, and they went right up the Columbia Pike and were probably within 20 to 25 yards of the Confederate campfires. And they got by there in the middle of the night, and of course Schofield was able to come up here and then reinforce. And part of the problem with them coming into Nashville was that they delayed after Franklin. The weather had been cooperating. Early December in 1864, it got very, very cold and icy here. And so they could not do anything as far as defense of Nashville until the 15th and 16th of December. That's why that battle took that long. Plus it took time for the Confederates to kind of regroup after Franklin, because they'd lost so much of their command structure down there in the Army of Tennessee. And so they came up here and came in. Fort Negley really was never attacked directly, and it was, as Captain Radcliffe said, they were this was part of a string of forts. This is the largest inland stone fort that was built during the Civil War, and still remains there today. And that's one of the reasons that we fought so hard last year to preserve this, because the history that's here, and plus the fact that there were so many contraband and free blacks that built this, and there was over 600 of them that died in the building of this fort. And then after the fort was built, you had all the units that had been formed here, and my great-great-uncle helped form the 16th USCT, and they were drawing slaves that had come in from the area, and were putting them in from the Columbia area and the Donaldson area and up and around Clarksville, and then here. So they were very, very important part of this activity here. And then there was another colored regiment up in Clarksville at Fort Defiance up there that was the 101st United States Colored Troops. But my great-great-granduncle was in the 16th USCT, and if you look at the line of battle, and I always tell people this story, if you look at the line of battle when they went down to Range Cut and fought down in the railroad cut and got cut up so bad down there, it's the 14th, 15th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and 17th that were at the railroad cut. My uncle's regiment was the 16th. Colonel Gaw, who was the commander of that unit, got them pulled off to guard supplies up on the Cumberland River during the battle. So they weren't in the battle, but I found out that my great-great-granduncle got himself detached and was still down there in the railroad cut with the troops during the battle. On a gray horse, perfect target, but he survived. So I'm very, very glad that happened.
Today, the 15th, is the actual anniversary of the battle that took place in Nashville in 1864. And the context, as far as Fort Negley goes, it's the largest inland fort on the side of the Appalachian Mountains next to Washington, D.C. Nashville was a supply center, supply depot, and the rail lines were important because troop transport and equipment, and weapons and food and whatnot. It was a central depot for all the fighting going on in Georgia and Alabama and everything. And so it was very important that the Federal Army had control of this town. Not to mention the waterways, because a lot of stuff was shipped by water. So the Yankees had it, and the South wanted it back. So they wanted to fight for it, and it wasn't going to happen. Now, as far as the construction here, in 1862 when they got here, there was a big threat of a Confederate attack. And they weren't ready. The Northern Army was not ready. So they had to build a string of forts around the whole city from the south. So we started at the Cumberland River to the Cumberland River over off of Charlotte Pike over there. There were forts. They were smaller than this one. This was the largest. Up on the Reservoir Hill was Fort Casino. That was in the link. See where the reservoir is? There's a fort up there, and it goes around over to Belmont College, Vanderbilt. It goes all the way around the West End, and that was a defensive setup. They impressed hundreds and hundreds of blacks, free and slave, to build this fort due to the emergency. A lot of them were working men, women, and they just basically got impressed to do it. I mean, bayonets and pistols. You got to go up here on this hill and build it now. And they did it, and they did it in 5 months. Without the advantage of technology, without the advantage of, proper tools, and women, children, and men up here. And those flags out there, they represent the ones that they died in the process. So, yeah, this is important we're here. Fort Negley opened the Battle of Nashville. The first shot of the battle came from here. Roughly 2 miles that away, a lot of people dying. Nashville was nothing but a big field hospital after it was over. But we don't want to forget what happened here. It's easy to walk away or don't care, but, there's something spiritual and something special about being here on this day. Black men died right out Murfreesboro Road there, Polk Avenue. First day of the battle. Second day of the battle, more black men died out on Harding Pike and I-65 there at Peach Orchard Hill. And they were fighting not to preserve the Union. They were fighting to free themselves. And we're still fighting to free ourselves. It's got a lot of meaning today. goodbye to us, they're here. They're here with us. I can almost feel them standing around us. Don't forget them. And don't forget the folks that built that place and the ones that fought here in that horrible 2 days. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping, no more weeping, no more weeping over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go